A goblet is one of those long-necked water vessels used in India for cooling water. So if you've been to India, you should know a goblet. Well, it's just a little experiment, but I hope it kept you awake for a little while for tea time this afternoon. Because language is really very important. Our dominant scientific worldview, for example, was mainly developed, mainly evolved in European languages. Our present dominant scientific worldview mainly evolved in European languages. Now, that meant with common roots and close relationships. But languages, all of which happen to be structured in such a way that it forces us to talk, to communicate in terms of thing nouns and action verbs. Consider it. It forces us to communicate in such a way, this language structure, that gives us a worldview in which we actually see things as separate, that stay still or move or are moved in relation to one another. English, for example, is one of the poorest philosophical languages. It's a marvelous language for trade and commerce. And it's because it's a wonderful language for trade and commerce, it has spread all over the world. Because what is the world interested in? Trade and commerce. All right? The value of the American dollar. All right? Whether you like it or not. The value of American dollar. Trade and commerce. So this is what is going on. Now, so we have divided up the world into things, nouns, and verbs, action, which move or are moved in relation to things. So if we could speak another kind of language, and some human languages do not make out that kind of distinction between nouns and verbs. There are languages, among which is the Hopi language of Southwest United States, Nootka in Alaska, various other languages. There are languages which perceive the world as a pattern of interwoven processes, in which the words themselves are process words, not verb-noun words. And it's rather interesting because basically all of our nouns come from verbal roots. You look up a word, you get the verbal root. But we've forgotten that, and we like to make things. This is a table. The table sits here. And then we attribute various qualities, characteristics. This is a table too high, too low. It's a table that is too marked up inside. and we apply characteristics. Perhaps the most common example, the easiest one to grasp. Have you ever sat in an uncomfortable chair? Well, there is no such animal. A chair is a chair. Your relation to the chair may be uncomfortable. The chair is neither comfortable nor uncomfortable. But this is what we do. We had the piano here, we could say, piano is out of tune. Piano isn't out of tune. Piano is just a piano. To your ear, where is the tuneness of it, Joshua?
In the perception.
In the perception. But we do this all the time. So we fail to communicate. One of the very interesting examples that I want to give you, as you know, we have a set of notes concerning HPB's own classes in the Secret Doctrine. Many of you are familiar with these notes that were left by one of her students, Commander Robert Bowen, known as the famous Bowen Notes, and he had shown them to her just weeks before her passing. And he records that at the outset of the studies, HPB commented about her work, The Secret Doctrine, saying that it contains just as much as can be received by the world during this coming century. Now, I suppose if HPB were sitting here making that statement, we wouldn't question what she meant by it. But Commander Bowen questioned. He said, "What do you mean by the word world?" This is very interesting. Because if you hear that statement, Secret Doctrine contains just as much as can be received by the world during this coming century. How would you interpret that statement? What would it say to you?
It would imply that there was quite a lot more that could have been said, a lot more knowledge.
Yes. Now, she was asked what she meant by the term world. And she defined world as man living in the personal nature. This is why I say inherent in the Secret Doctrine is this whole message. I've used it very often in different ways. Live the life if you would come to the wisdom. That's essentially the message. In other words, the transformation of the personal nature will reveal more of the wisdom. The world, in other words, for her, was not something out there. This is 100 years ago. Today, this would be easily accepted. But this must have been a shock 100 and some years ago when she said that. Because the world was assumed to be out there. It's the way it is. My observation of it does not change it. What has happened in science in the 100 years? The observer changes the observation and changes the observed. You cannot observe the world without changing the world. This is contemporary physics. If you don't believe me, read any of the contemporary physicists. David Bohm and John Wheeler and any of the others. Our very observation of the world changes the world. Changes, you cannot observe even with instruments because you have introduced something that changes the very nature of what is observed. Am I right, Charleston? Because you work in the field of science.
But we went to study science that many years ago,
Mm-hmm.
something. This wasn't an accepted view. You had to get it right.
Yes,
There was no variation.
that's right. Now we know,
1944.
but now we know that the observer is the observed, as Mr. Krishnamurti has put it. And we are what Dr. Wheeler calls co-creators, co-participants in the process. So the world, she added, the disciple who is not living in the world cannot find any more in the book than the world finds. H.P.B. was struggling for words because she was limited, of course, by the vocabulary of her time. We have another vocabulary. We have a rich vocabulary today. If you don't believe me, just look at the number of new words that are added to the English language every year. Hundreds of new words have been added to the English language. This is why dictionary makers never run out of a job. And because new connotations, new understanding, new meanings are given. This has led to a whole science known as neuro-linguistic programming. Isn't that a nice fancy name? Neuro-linguistic programming, which presupposes that the behavior of an individual can be changed by the proper use of language and by constantly updating and upgrading the mental software. Just language. So, as Val was talking to me during the lunch break, what's the famous statement of general semantics, Val? Hmm?
I don't think it was me.
The map is not the territory.
That's
All
what
right.
you're talking to B, I think.
Talking to me.
You were talking to B.
Hmm?
It was B that...
Oh, it was B. B, I'm sorry, B. I'm got you. Yes, that's right, isn't it, B? The map is not the territory. I can look at maps of New Zealand. I can see where everything is, but until John drove me from New Plymouth to Auckland, I didn't know the road. Sorry, B, I apologize. So, experience has a structure. And so the structure is given by our language. Constantly. We are all the time programmed by our language. The map is not the territory. Our understanding of people may be of only one aspect of them. And so just as a map has to be updated, so our understanding of each other may need to be updated. But how often do we do that? We make up our minds about somebody, and that's it. We stick with it. So this is all to do with how we know. The meaning we give things comes from the context in which we see them. And we supply this context not always from the sense impressions we receive from our world, but from the patterns that are always evolving inside our very nervous system. Patterns which reveal themselves as richly complex, self-organizing, partly conscious ideas which ever compose and recompose themselves through our individual and cultural experiences. So we are all the time in shifting. Our human heritage is to continually work at making conscious, thoughtful sense of all of these patterns. And so we embed all new information into existing brain-mind patterns. We put these patterns into context and categories of meaning. We add to them, we change them, we rearrange them, we distort them, and enrich them until they make sense as part of our overall worldview. Sometimes we take the ideas of Theosophy and superimpose them upon our cultural, educational, and religious and social structures with which we are already embedded. I can ask you, when was the last time you had an original idea? Notice this morning, for example, how you wanted to take whatever I was saying and put it into the mold of what you already knew. This is what we do. And then we're content and say, oh yes, that's what she was saying. B?
It did not the Mahatma say that at our present stage we don't have original thoughts?
I think we could have some original thoughts. I think we ought to have some original thoughts. Now, we have about, according to this schedule there, we have about 15 minutes before.
How do we know if they're original or not? We don't know if they're original or not.
Try them out.
I know when Mrs. Lavender was here, or something happened between her and me, and she said to me, now was that your thought, or was it my thought putting it into you? I said, well, how did I know?
How do you know? Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. Maybe none of the things I said this morning was very original at all. But I tried to shock you into some sort of thing. But you like to put it into neat little cages. We take terms like karma and we wrap it up, and and that's a neat little.
Yeah, I'd like to give you two slightly original thoughts about scientific things that you've mentioned, which are, and they are the sort of popular things about science. One of them is, you mentioned the observer changes the thing observed. And I believe that the only sense in which that is actually true is in the sense that if you throw some light at an atom and bounce it off, then you had an effect on it. But most of us don't mean that by being observant. Mostly what we mean is we put our head in the way of the light that bounces off. And if all we do is we put our eye in front of the light that's coming off, then it doesn't alter the thing. It's only the fact that that some light was thrown at it and bounced off. That is the actual observation that alters it. And of course, that's not really a surprise, that if we bounce something off something, that will affect it. So that's one. And the other one you mentioned about the light waves and particles duality, and said things can be right and wrong. And I believe that's because the word light is being used in more than one way.
Oh, yeah.
And at a deeper level, there isn't actually any mystery at all. And that I would liken it to, if you have a full bucket of water and you drip a tap into it, then ripples will go across the surface and drips will fall out. And the mistake that's made in physics is to assume that the drip that falls in, the one that falls out is the same one. And it isn't. The drip falls in, the wave travels across, and the drip falls out. And that's what happens when light is emitted, travels and is absorbed. So in part of the process, it's a particle, part of it, it's a wave. But there's no actual mystery, there's no contradiction.
Well, my purpose isn't to get into the details of science.
Yeah.
We have a number of members. Dr. Amit Goswami, who gave a marvelous talk at Crotona last September, who is a physicist and used use many of these illustrations that I'm using. But, that's not my purpose. But the point is that this is really what Mr. Krishnamurti, for example, has been saying all along. But what I'm trying to get you to see is that we are so conditioned to think in certain ways. And this is conditioning. This is our conditioning. And we're so unaware of being conditioned. Well, I don't want to get too far afield. What I would like you to, I want to, before we break for the afternoon tea break, is to suggest to you your assignment for the weekend. What I'd like you to do now on this piece of paper, first of all, is just write down, this is only for your use, only for your use. I'm not going to put it on the board, only for your use. I'd like you to put down 5 concepts. 5 concepts that to you are the most important ideas that Theosophy presents to us. You can make them just single words, or 2, 3 words, or a sentence, however you want to.
notes if we get them all right.
One of the, among them, perhaps I should put it this way, among the most precious documents that we have from the last century are the Mahatma letters to Mr. Sinnott and Mr. Hume. We have just one side of the correspondence, by and large. In some cases, we have questions and the answers. There's a few letters that we have both the questions and answers. But by and large, we have just the one side of the correspondence. But those letters are really quite unique. As many of you know, the majority of them are housed in the British Museum Library, the rare book room, rare manuscript room. And they are really among the most precious treasures that we have access to as members of the society, in my view. We also have many other letters. We have HPB's letters to Mr. Sinnott. A wealth of information is given in HPB letters. And many of her letters have still to be published. But this is a project that was underway by our late lamented friend John Cooper. But it will be a project carried on in the American section where he was committed to its publication, and we had contracts with him for it. So eventually they'll all see the light of day. Now, while we are accustomed today to email and faxes and all the other gadgetry, the art of writing letters has somehow been lost. But I think that letters have a certain intimate quality. And I'm going to suggest that you are going to write 5 letters, each letter about one of these concepts that you've put down. You're going to address the letter to my unknown friend. And you are going to tie up these letters with a nice red ribbon that's marked to be opened in the year 2099. You do not know who your unknown friend is that will be opening them in 2099. But I'd like you to use your creative imagination. That's part of this title of this series. Saying, my unknown friend, I'm speaking to you across the years that comprise a century. I'm writing to you as I sit here in HPB Hall in Auckland. And I have come to feel that one of the most significant ideas that Theosophy has presented to me is, my understanding of that idea is, I hope that when you read this, my unknown friend, in 2099, the world will have so far advanced. The world, which is the individual, personal nature, will have so far advanced that war will be impossible. That the generation following mine will have resolved the problem of ecological disaster. That you will be living in a better world, but it would be nice to let you know what I am thinking now, what I understand. Because maybe it will be a stepping stone to what you will be understanding as you consider this idea in 2099. So put yourself into this. You're going to write 5 letters this weekend. Each letter to this unknown friend of a century hence, saying what you mean by this idea, what this idea means to me now. This to me was one of the great ideas that really blew my mind, really gave me a new understanding of human existence. And I'm sharing it with you in the hope that it will be perhaps look like a very crude beginning to an idea that you will have come on and developed further and found new meaning in and so on. Just as the ideas that are there in the Mahatma letters, there in HPB's letters and in the letters of others who left a record of their experiences in the society 100 years ago, are available to us today. This is our gift to the unknown friends of a century hence. So put yourself into that. And I hope that on Monday morning you will have 5 letters, and you'll be ready, some of you at least, will be ready, willing to share a letter so that we see what it sounds like. But I think, there's something very precious about letters like that. If you come on the letters that HPB wrote to Mrs. Sinnott, some of the most beautiful letters that she wrote, and when she talked about her own struggles and the problem of trying to explain things and what she was going through and so on. HPB comes alive, I can tell you, if you've read her letters, and particularly the letters to Mrs. Sinnott, who was her loyal friend, Patience Sinnott, probably not named Patience for nothing. Had to be very patient with Alfred Percy Sinnott. He was always called Percy. But these are wonderful, where HPB really shares her ideas in an intimate way with a dear friend. Now, you don't know this friend, my unknown friend of 2099, but what you want to share is what the idea means to you now. This is the idea that has been so meaningful to me. I'm not sure it will mean the same to you 100 years from now, but let me tell you what it means to me as I live and work and breathe in this fantastic 20th century incarnation. So, I hope you'll enjoy doing it. I think it can be an exciting sort of thing. Because the only way to awaken the creative imagination is to use the creative imagination. I could talk from now till the cows come home, as it were, about the creative imagination. But unless you begin to use it, visualize your friend a century hence. Share what this means to you. Put it down in words. If you can come up with 5 letters, it'll be wonderful, because there'll be something you can read. Maybe a year from now you'll change the letters. But what does that idea mean to you now that you want to share with your unknown friend a century hence? I hope you'll enjoy it. It can be fun. As I said, the word schooling, schola, means leisure, and it's related to ludens, to fun, play. So this is the game you're going to play. This is the game.
Use it or lose it. Use it or lose it, that's what our lady priests say.
Well, enjoy it. I really think that it will have, this whole seminar will have more meaning if you can enter into it and really try to explore this. I know some of you probably will say, oh no, I'm too busy, I can't do that. What if HBB had been too busy to write letters? What if the Mahatmas had said, no, we have our own work. We're not going to spend time writing letters to you two Englishmen. Remember, it's Mr. Sinnott that gave us the language we have. Really, HBB used that language then in the Secret Doctrine, but it was Mr. Sinnott who really gave us our theosophical language, very much, who endeavored really to understand and who asked questions and so on. We owe a very great deal to Mr. Sinnott. We don't often realize. So, consider your unknown friend in 2099. All right, let's take our break then.